Hey, hi, my name is Elena Jones, and my presentation is on Samsara, the Wheel of Death and Rebirth. So the Upanishads were actually Hinduism texts that were a transition from traditional texts into religious ideas. And it stated that life is transitory, governed by endless cycles of death and rebirth, and life is filled with playful illusion that hides the true nature of reality. It further explains that life is unsatisfactory, not because bad things happen to people, but rather because no matter how good life is, it always ends. It always ends in old age, sickness, and death just leads to rebirth and a new round of life and death. So in the Upanishads, it describes samsara using the image of the chariot wheel, and that life is the great wheel of samsara, in which death is always followed by rebirth. And everything is always changing, but in a circular fashion. So you were born and you grow into maturity, followed by old age, suffering, and death, only to be born again. And that the fundamental problem of life is the illusion rooted in selfish desire, which creates a disconnection from others. And desire creates an illusion, and illusion creates suffering, which one reinforces and generates the other. And that liberation from the wheel of samsara is possible if you eliminate all desires, and that these selfish desires that create the illusion is what ties us to samsara. So Atman and samsara. So the self that is lost in death, which is the jiva, is only to be reborn again, is an illusionary self, and that one's true self is never born and never dies, which is the Atman. And liberation from this cycle is to come into direct insight that one's true self in order to realize, which is the Atman. So the fundamental problem of life that ties us to samsara is the illusion rooted in selfish desire, that our conscious bodily self is actually a distortion of one's true identity. And dissolution of this will help you realize that your true self is universal and undying, and that this is the same as Brahman, which is what all life comes from. And the idea that, like, the selfish desires being like the idea that I want something, and you have created the illusion that which is like separate from all others, by pursuing um ideas with no essential connection to other people. So you must become aware that what remains beyond your selfish desires is our universal undying self, the Atman, and it is the same as the Brahman. So an example of this, or like a better understanding of this provided by the text, is the use of an iceberg, um, which is like an example of Moksha and Atman. So it's obtaining liberation from the wheel by reaching liberating enlightenment, which is Moksha. So in the text, I said it uses the example of an iceberg, and each person is considered an iceberg. So I'm an iceberg. Um, as we all know with icebergs, that only the tip can be seen, and then like we can't see what is below in the water. So one would think that moksha, or liberating enlightenment towards seeing the Atman, would occur when the tip of the iceberg becomes directly aware with the hidden ice below, that this is the one true self, but in actuality, the iceberg must realize that the ice is the same as the water that it's floating in, that they are not separate, just as if one realizes that the Atman is the same as the Brahman. Therefore, this explains that all other selves are beings of one self, one reality, the Brahman. And in this state of liberated consciousness, you are without desire and without self. Thus, you are no longer clinging to the wheel of rebirth or samsara. So how do you achieve this like liberating enlightenment or this moksha? So the Upanishads developed four major strategies, which were the yogas or spiritual disciplines leading to unity with Brahman. So the first two were the yogas of knowledge that enlighten us about the caste system, and then the second two were the yogas that lead us to the royal path or the path of love and devotion, by using inward meditations, by stilling the mind in order to break the illusions of self. And lastly, so we have karma, which as you engage in the quest for liberation from one life to your next destiny, it's governed by the laws of karma. And that karma is the cosmic law of justice at work in the universe that guarantees everyone gets exactly what they deserve. But this does not always occur within the confines of a single lifetime, but in many. And it states that those who are selfish and do evil in one lifetime will return in the lower rebirth. And where and then they'll be required to learn the lessons they'll be required to learn the lessons they failed to learn in past lives. And if they do, in their next life, they will be rewarded in a higher birth order, leading them closer to their final liberation. So it's thought that like therefore nothing in life is accidental and every event has a meaning and a purpose, and there is something to be learned from each event that can bring us closer to liberation once learned. So in conclusion, like the main points of my presentation were that life is transitory, governed by an endless cycle of death and rebirth, which is samsara. And one's own desires causes an illusion that the self is separate from all others. And in this selfish desire, it ties us to the wheel of samsara. And in order to be free from the wheel, one must achieve true moksha or enlightenment liberation. And your true self is never born and never dies, and it is the same as the Brahman. So your true self can be thought of like as your soul. And to achieve moksha, we must use the four yogas. And karma is a cosmic law of justice that dictates how we move up in the caste system. So thank you. I hope you guys enjoyed my presentation.